let's get straight into the first debate. Should the King refund the NHS over the royal rent row? Now, the royal family has received millions of pounds of income from rent from public bodies like the NHS, schools and even the armed forces. That's according to an investigation by Channel 4 and the Sunday Times. Now, the Duchys of Lancaster and Cornwall both hold large amounts of land and commercial properties in England and Wales, and they lease them out to public bodies. One example is an £11.4 million deal for one NHS trust to store ambulances in a London warehouse owned by the royals. Now, a spokesperson for the King's private estate said that it complies with all relevant UK legislation and regulatory standards applicable to its business activities. In essence, they're doing nothing wrong. But morally speaking, should he give the money back? And when we say he, we mean the King, Mike.
Well, the King runs the Duchy of Lancaster, and the Prince of Wales, Prince William, runs the Duchy of Cornwall. Between them, two of the biggest landowners in the country. Now, this story comes up about every 10 years. I've done this story 2 or 3 times during my career, OK? And there's a fundamental understanding about land ownership in this country. This land has been owned by the royal family and the people in it going back centuries, if not millenniums, you see what I mean? And there are other massive landowners in this country. I used to know the Duke of Westminster, not the current one, but the previous one, because he was chairman of the board of the governors at my school, the King's School Chester, where he's got a huge estate. And it was fascinating about the way he would talk about the husbandry of huge estates of land, which had to be managed brilliantly or else they went into disrepair. Now, I know people say, oh, the King is ripping off the NHS. It's not that. These estates are managed by huge companies, huge land companies. Duke of Westminster's got 300 acres in Belgravia in London. They have to be managed because if they're not, the land goes to rack and ruin. And if the King wasn't charging rent for that land where those ambulances are stored, somebody else would. He actually manages it very well, and it's a benefit to the country.
There's an argument, I mean, we don't know, it's not being compared, but the King could be offering them a very good rate, and if the King decides that he cannot rent out any longer to any of our public services, we as taxpayers might actually be paying the price for that. We might see those prices go up.
I'm not sure. I think it was a brilliant investigation by the Sunday Times and Dispatches. I'd never even considered this. I mean, you've done it every 10 years or so, but I mean, I didn't realise it. I mean, you know, the King does this and manages these things on behalf of the nation, you would think. But actually, when you drill down into it, it's been in royal possession since 1337 in one case and 1399 in another case.
That's right.
The country was very different then. What kind of country do we want to be? OK, we've decided that apart from a brief period in the 17th century that we want a monarch, OK? But what kind of monarch, what kind of monarchy? I would suggest that in the modern world, in 2024, we don't want a monarchy that runs everything as though it's a commercial enterprise for profit. You know, the King will go around to a hospital or to the Ministry of Defence, to soldiers, because obviously the King is the Colonel-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and say, you're doing a great job, bravo, bravo. But only last week we had a budget that told us that the public finances are in a mess and we've all got to tighten our belts. Well, in that case, perhaps these estates should be managed as a social enterprise as opposed to a commercial entity.
Who would you give the land to if the King wasn't in charge of it and it is managed very well? I mean, the only place in the world where nobody's allowed to own land is in a mass communist state. All property is theft.
Nobody is saying that.
The royal family were offered this, or granted this land back in the 1300s. So you're right, very different landscape there. And the property worth, the land worth was very different. Nowadays, with property prices and the husbandry and maybe how well they've looked after this land, it has accumulated a huge amount of wealth for the royal family. So we're in a very different position to where we were in the 1300s.
Who would you give it to?
Well, not that they shouldn't keep it, but sorry, what I was trying to get to there and what I was going to ask you was, they don't pay corporation tax, but clearly they are running this like a business. And so if they are going to rent out to public bodies, perhaps they should be paying their fair share of corporation tax too.
Well, I think you made a very good point at the start of the show. Perhaps they're managing it so well that there's no reason to put it in anybody else's hands because, you know, although titularly at the top the King owns that land, he doesn't really. He's head of a corporation that has a huge interest in land and property, which is managed very well.
Let's go to the calls. William from Renfrewshire, what do you think about this whole rent row in the royal family?
It's just a usual robbery for the British citizens. We've no say, no accountability from them. And it'd be great if they could stand for election every so many years and see what the British public actually think. At the end of the day, they jump the queue for the health service.
William,
People are waiting in operations they can't get. And these people do exactly what they like, and they keep stealing for the British public, stealing for the British government, and they have no accountability whatsoever.
well, I mean, stealing is probably the wrong term to use because they're actually not breaking any laws. Morally speaking, William, you might very well feel that that is exactly what they're doing. I'm getting the feeling from you, though, William, that you're not impressed with the royal family at all. You might be a bit of a Republican. Would I be right?
Yes, you're right, but does that mean to say the things I'm saying are not valid?
No, it's not.
At the end of the day, we criticised the Prime Minister for taking free glasses and suits and everything. And at the end of the day, we're quite criticising anybody else. But as soon as the Royals comes up, there seems to be this form of brainwashing whoever not supposed to criticise them.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what we're doing in this show, William. I suppose the counter argument is they voluntarily pay, and this, you might think that's outrageous that they're even voluntarily paying income tax at the highest band, 45%. So they are contributing.
Sorry, Storm, you don't understand how that came about. The Queen was approached by people, and they told her if she voluntarily paid income tax, she'd get more benefits back for it. That's how it came about.
Oh, I don't know what I didn't actually know about the more benefits situation, William. But I think it was a case of it's probably time in terms of PR to be paying a bit more tax. And maybe, William, this is one of those turning points as well, where we will see the royal family come out and say, OK, we're going to pay corporation tax because they've been outed as having a very, very profitable business. If we have decided,
Tom, could I just finish with this? If people think the royal family are so wonderful, let them stand for an election. Put their faith in the royal family and let them stand for an election.
I mean, that
let the public decide.
William, I do hear your point completely, but then they wouldn't be the royal family, would they? Wouldn't be the same tradition. But thank you very much for your call. Kathy from Lancashire, I'm starting to wonder whether this debate is less about the finances and the fairness involved and actually just about whether you support the royal family or not.
Oh, no. Well, it's a bit of both because I used to be a landlord quite a few years ago, Storm. If my properties were anything like those that they rent out, I would have been taken to court. There are rules and regulations, and they should follow them the same as everybody else does. It's disgraceful that people are living in poverty because they can't heat the properties because of the state of them, and the King or William should not be renting properties out to the NHS. What century are we in?
Kathy, first of all, just to help us out legally here, both the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall both say that they are following all the legal obligations. No. Kathy, as far as even dispatches are aware, I mean, they are. It's just that we have set up a situation where they have privileges that you and I wouldn't have. And I suppose what you're saying is that is incredibly unfair and we need to sort that situation out because they are running this as a business. And you're right, they're charging the NHS. But I put to you, Kathy, that actually perhaps, and I don't know whether this is true or not, nobody will really know, but perhaps the reason the NHS are renting out warehouses from the royal family is because that particular warehouse they are getting for cheaper than they would if they had to pay another private organisation. And actually what King Charles is doing is providing properties and providing land for our public services at a much cheaper rate than they would do from maybe your friend.
Yeah.
Quite possibly he's charging them cheaper, but at the end of the day, he doesn't need the money. It's pure greed.
No, Kathy, it's not. I'm sorry, can I just interject? We've got this out of proportion. The King is not the biggest landowner in this country. The government is the biggest landowner. The Forestry Commission, the Church of England, they all have vast estates, much bigger than the King.
But in the end, when it comes to the government, we are the government. We are the people.
I agree,
but
the government still charge taxpayers to use properties they own because they're the biggest landowner in the country.
But I have scratched my head for ages, and I think, Kathy, you've got an interesting point here, and I don't know the answer to this, but the royal family don't have to pay rent. They don't have to pay for their security. All of this is covered by they do, but it's covered by the sovereign grant. Refurbishment quite considerably is covered by the sovereign grant of buildings that are owned essentially by the taxpayer. I can't work out what this £20 million that they are receiving yearly is paying for. All the staff in all the royal residence are paid for by the sovereign grant.
Yeah.
So is it just bread and cereal?
No, it's the upkeep. It's the upkeep of the lands. They own a lot of land in Cornwall, for instance. That land's got to be kept up. Rented farms are on that land. They have to be maintained. Also, Balmoral and Sandringham are private properties owned by the king, so he has to derive an income somewhere to look after his home like anybody else does.
But he has a sovereign grant, and then he had all the
sovereign grant looks after only those crown estates properties.
The sovereign grant next year is £130 million.
Yeah, and
it should be enough.
And it's signed off by Parliament, so it's always examined publicly, and we think it's a good idea because we keep voting it through.
OK, Cathy, thank you very much for your call. Doug from Cornwall, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, the king is entitled to. He's not breaking the law. No. But having said that, if he wants to keep the money, which I think he should give it back, he even takes money down here in Cornwall from the RNLI, of which he's supposed to be the patron. But if he wants to play by the rules, that's fine. Then he should play by the rules and start paying corporation tax, income tax, and heritage tax, the same as the rest of us.
And inheritance tax.
Which he does. And as far as who owns the land, what are you going to do with it? Well, the land should be given to the councils that it's within, and they will then charge the people, and they
Doug,
tax.
Yeah. Arguably, the royal family have done not too bad a job in keeping this land in a usable state. Councils, however, seem to be run down to the ground. They were constantly getting calls complaining about them being mismanaged. So really handing that land over to councils, do you think that's going to be the best idea, just in terms of
well, these are experts,
the efficiencies?
Well, the council will make money from it. What the money that he's charging?
You think the councils would be even cheaper than the royal family?
Sorry?
You think the council would be even cheaper than the royal family?
Well, I mean, the land, if you really want to go into it, whose land is it? And it really isn't his.
Well, I mean, he was given it.
They're making massive profits. I mean, it's about the constitution.
Yeah, but Doug's point was they should start paying tax, inheritance tax and all the rest of it. Well, if you give up all their land, they have nothing to actually pay tax or inheritance tax on, so we're getting nothing out of that. I'm just wondering whether actually Doug's original suggestion of keeping just paying tax is more than enough to make it an equal level playing field.
It might be, or it might very well be that instead of the king and Prince William are just keeping that profit, couldn't they channel it back into the public pot?
But it's channeled back into those estates. Most of the money is channeled back into those estates. They're experts at running them. That's why they've run them for 700 years. Why give them to somebody?
Years, but the country is different from what it was. We had knights and barons, and we used to put people to the sword.
But
back
it's
in the
put to
14th
Parliament
century.
every year, and every year Parliament votes it through.
Parliament bends
and we
the
are
knee.
Parliament.
Well,
we are Parliament.
Parliament bends the knee. We've got to stop bending the knee in quite this way. It's a modern monarchy. We should be a modern monarchy for a modern country.
What it is a very interesting insight into the royal finances. It hasn't been great PR, so it would be very interesting, or it will be very interesting to find out what the royal family do in the weeks ahead.